Okay, we're gonna do a video real quick over the special senses taste and smell lecture. So there's a lot less material with these two senses compared to the ear and the eye. So we'll bust through both of them in one little video here. So we'll start with olfactory. Olfaction is the sense of smell. Okay, it's located in the nasal cavity and contains olfactory sensory neurons. Okay. The way we smell is we smell things called odorants, which are in the air. They're water soluble, lipid soluble substances in the air. And when we breathe in more, when we sniff, especially bring in more airflow into our nasal cavity, we bring in more odorants, and those stimulate our olfactory receptors, which stimulate our olfactory nerve. And that goes into our temporal lobes, into our hypothalamus, into our hippocampus. It stimulates different things there that we'll talk about in a few minutes. So our olfactory organs, we see that here's the olfactory bulb. Okay, we're familiar with that when we saw on the sheep's brain. When we were looking at the inferior surface, we saw these big bulbs on the inferior surface of the brain. Okay, that was the olfactory bulb here. Okay, what we didn't see was those extra olfactory nerves that come down and go through this cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone. Okay, so when we look at the skull in a couple weeks, we'll find that the skull actually has holes. Okay, we see in this picture, there's actually a little literal hole within the bone where the nerve goes through. So there's holes through this cribriform plate to allow the nerve fibers through. Okay, and then the nerve fibers are end with these receptor cells, okay, which go down and end with this dendritic bulb and little cilia-shaped dendrites that come out and actually have receptor proteins that respond to, get stimulated by the odorants. Okay, so um, we have epithelial tissue that covers the inferior surface of this ethmoid bone and this cribriform plate. The perpendicular plate here, the superior portion of the perpendicular plate, and the superior nasal concha are all covered with this epithelial cell. Okay, so this epithelial layer has a couple different cells. We have the basal cells here. These are the stem cells that reproduce or divide into daughter cells. We have supporting cells here, these pink cells, and then we have the actual receptor cells. Okay, these receptor cells come together to form these olfactory nerve fibers. And like I already said, these receptor cells end at this dendritic bulb that projects past the epithelial cells here and extend cilia-like dendrites out into the mucus, surrounding mucus, where the odorants are attracted. Um, so the odorants attach here to the receptor proteins and stimulate these receptor cells, which stimulates the nerve. And the nerve goes and synapses at this olfactory bulb. And then it goes to the temporal lobe. And then it goes to the hypothalamus and the hippocampus as well. So that's it, the epithelial layer. We also have this lamina propria layer. Okay, this is areolar tissue. So we have blood vessels, we have the nerves that come through here. And then we also have these glands, olfactory glands or Bowman's glands. They produce the mucin, which combines with water to form the mucus. Okay, and the mucus, this is what is on top of this epithelial tissue. Okay, and what these dendrites extend into is that mucus that's released by these olfactory cells, olfactory glands, which are in the lamina propria layer. So when we have odorants that come up and that stimulate these protein receptors on the dendrites of the receptor cells, we have odorants that stimulate G-couple proteins receptors. So when they come in, they activate the G protein here, and it changes the ATP into cyclic AMP, or the adenylate cyclase into cyclic AMP. Okay, and then we have cyclic AMP attaching to the receptor here to open up sodium ion channels. Okay, so it's a second messenger activation here. where we open up the sodium channels through a G-coupled protein receptor. Okay. When the sodium comes through, it depolarizes this membrane and causes a graded generator potential, which then forms the action potential stimulating the nerve fibers, which then goes to the temporal lobe and hypothalamus and hippocampus. So the pathway here, like we said, we have the odorants that come up and attach to the receptor cells. The receptor cells are stimulated, stimulating this nerve, okay, propagating into the olfactory bulb. This is where its synapses, first synapses in the olfactory bulb, and then that goes directly to the temporal lobes, an area called the uncus, and the temporal lobes is the only sensory information that leads directly to the cerebral cortex without relaying through the thalamus. Okay, all the other sensory information goes through the thalamus and then to the cortex, and the olfactory information goes straight from this olfactory bulb directly to the temporal lobe. Okay, it also goes to the hypothalamus and the limbic system, the hippocampus. Okay, the hippocampus, remember, is memory and emotion. So we have a strong link to memory, emotion, behavioral responses because of this link to the limbic system and the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, remember, is in charge of autonomics. So when you get hormone release or activation to stimulate your heart rate and things like that, hypothalamus is involved in that. So you have this physiological response along with the memories and behavioral emotional response associated with olfactory. Okay, so a lot of people can smell a certain thing and instantly be taken back to a specific memory because it is very linked with memory and hippocampus. Okay. Now, we have something called central adaptation within our olfactory sense. Okay, this means that other nuclei within the brain innervate the olfactory bulbs and kind of turn off our awareness of a new smell. So say we walk into the kitchen and we smell burnt food, burnt bacon is really strong, and we're in the kitchen for a few minutes, we start to not notice it, really. This is that central adaptation. But if someone brings in a whole bouquet of flowers into the kitchen that are really fragrant, we can smell those. So we are adapted to that old sense. Okay, we lose awareness fairly quickly of that old sense, but can remain sensitive to other new smells. Okay. But as we age, we have a decline with the number of neurons and number of receptor cells. So we have a loss of olfactory function, which not only affects smell, but we'll see affects taste as well. So we'll move into taste. Taste is gustation. We have epithelial cells or taste receptors that are found on taste buds, and that's the main way we taste is through these taste buds. And then we have distribution of these taste buds throughout the surface of the tongue and through the pharynx and larynx as well. And we also have water receptors as well through the pharynx. So we'll start with the different papillae on the tongue. So lingual papillae, lingual tongue papillae, bump. So we got a bunch of bumps on our tongue. Okay, so we have the filiform first. The filiform, that's down here. This is what those look like. These don't have any taste buds. Okay, so these are just for creating friction within the mouth. Okay, they're on the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, and they help move the food around our mouth. And help bring food into our mouth and then move it around so we can start digesting it. But we don't actually taste with these papillae. And the fungiform are here. They're a little flatter, but they have these little grooves that go down. And down these grooves is where we have the taste buds. You can see that's the groove, it goes down, and we have the taste buds in the groove there, and that's how we taste. So there's, with the fungiform, these are scattered through the tongue, but especially on the tip and the sides of the tongue, and those contain about 5 taste buds per papillae. Okay. Then we have the valate. Valate are these ones are a bit bigger. Okay, and you can see here they're in this inverted V on the back of the tongue. So valate is an inverted V on the back of the tongue. They're a bit bigger, and they have about 100 taste buds per papillae. And we usually only have about 12, up to 12 on the tongue, but they've got a lot of taste buds within that little groove there. Okay. And then lastly, we have the foliate. The foliate papillae have less than the valate, but more than the fungiform in terms of taste buds. And these are scattered throughout the tongue, but mostly in the lateral margins of the tongue as well. So we taste all of the tastes throughout our tongue. We have the taste buds all scattered throughout our tongue, and we taste all the senses, the sweet, salty, bitter, sour, throughout the tongue. So I don't know. I don't know about you, but I remember in elementary school being taught you taste sweet up here and bitter back there. And that's not actually how we do it. We have taste buds throughout the tongue that taste all the senses, all the different tastes, the four main tastes. Okay. So now we'll look into specifically the taste bud itself. So those are down these little grooves here, and we have a couple different types of cells. Just like the olfactory sense, we have basal cells here that are the stem cells. Okay, those divide into transitional cells. They divide into daughter cells, and then those daughter cells mature into transitional cells. The transitional cells are transitional between the basilar and the gustatory cells. Okay, gustatory cells are the mature transitional cells. Transitional cells, you'll see, don't have these little microvilli in the end. They don't have the taste hairs. So when they fully mature into the gustatory cells, they will have these taste hairs, which get stimulated by the different foods or different substances in the mouth. And when those are stimulated, these gustatory cells stimulate the nerve associated with that portion of the tongue. These gustatory cells live about 10 days or so before they're replaced. So you have this continual cycle of the basal cells dividing and producing transitional cells, which then become gustatory cells, and then those die off and you replace them. So that's how the taste buds work. Now, once we stimulate the taste bud, we stimulate the specific nerve associated with that area of the tongue. So we already talked about the cranial nerves associated with the tongue. The cranial nerve 7, facial nerve, is the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. And those stop about the line of the valate papillae. And then posterior to that, the posterior 1/3 of the tongue is the glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay, that's cranial nerve 9. Okay. And then we didn't talk about cranial nerve 10. Cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve, innervates the taste buds of the epiglottis. So that's not on the tongue, it's further down in the pharynx there. So we have the epiglottis innervated by cranial nerve 10. And then cranial nerve 5, okay, the trigeminal nerve, we have the mandibular division. Okay, mandibular, that's the jaw, mandibular, innervates the tongue for texture and taste-related sensations. So if you're moving something around your mouth and it's smooth or oily or gritty or something like that, cranial nerve 5 is giving you that information, as well as sensations like peppery. Peppery is more of a sensation, it's not necessarily a taste. And you have that sensation, which is cranial nerve 5. Okay, so we have 4 different cranial nerves influencing our taste and sensation in our gustatory sense. Okay, so we stimulate these different cranial nerves. They go up into the solitary nucleus in the medulla. They go through the medial lemniscus, and medial lemniscus is this tract up to the thalamus. Okay, and then from the thalamus we go to the gustatory cortex in the insula and part of the temporal lobe. Okay. So that's how we have conscious perception of taste once we get into the cortex there. And then we also have a conscious perception of texture and taste-related sensation from cranial nerve 5. Okay. Now, like we talked about olfactory decreasing with age, we also have taste decreasing with age as well. We have less taste buds and we're less sensitive to taste, but we're also less sensitive to taste because of the decrease in olfactory sense. Okay? We're several thousand times more sensitive to taste when we have a fully functioning olfactory system. Okay, so most of you probably have experienced when you're sick and stuffy, you don't really have an appetite because nothing tastes like anything. Everything tastes really bland when you can't breathe through your nose. So our olfactory sense plays a huge part in how sensitive we are to taste. Now with taste, we also have one more taste. We have the four major ones: sweet, salty, sour, and bitter. But we have another one called umami. The umami is a pleasant or savory taste. Okay, this is influenced by glutamate, amino acid glutamate. Okay, so umami, that's a spice used in a lot of like Asian food. Okay, they toss some umami in there. It gives it a really pleasant flavor, savory taste, makes it taste really good. So these umami are only in the valate papillae. So we have all those different taste buds, 100 different taste buds in the valate papillae. Umami is one of those in there that senses the pleasant and savory taste. Okay. We also have the water receptors. Water receptors are in the pharynx. Okay, and these receptors are linked with the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus, again, controls autonomics, so it's going to control our water balance and our blood volume by releasing different hormones, like antidiuretic hormone. So the different receptors are stimulated in a little bit different way. We have salty and sour channels, okay, channels. So we have leak channels that allow the sodium through, and it depolarizes the membrane. With the sweet, bitter, and the umami receptors, these are similar to olfaction, where we have the G-coupled protein receptors that stimulate the second messenger. Okay, activate the second messenger, which then allows sodium into through the membrane to cause the generator potential and stimulate the receptor cells, which then stimulates the nerve and goes to the cortex. Goes to the brainstem and then to the cortex. So this last slide here, a few additional pieces of information here. We have protective mechanisms in place where we are more sensitive to bitter than we are to sour, and we're more sensitive to sour than we are sweet and salty, because sour are typically acids, okay? And when we have acids exposed to mucous membranes, it can damage the mucous membranes. So we're very sensitive to the sour taste, so we don't burn ourselves or cause damage to our mucous membranes in our mouth and pharynx. And we're also really sensitive to bitter, because typically bitter is associated with different biological toxins. So we don't want to be ingesting toxic or poisonous materials, so we're really sensitive to bitter. Now, taste is pretty subjective with each individual. It can differ quite significantly. So there's different compounds that, based on our genetics, we can be sensitive to and not be sensitive to. So there's this bitter chemical called PTC in things like Brussels sprouts and broccoli. And some people are sensitive to that, so they taste these foods as really bitter. And then some people are not sensitive to this. They don't taste, it's tasteless. The PTC is tasteless to them, so they can enjoy Brussels sprouts and broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower without having that bitter taste. So same thing with cilantro. I taste cilantro as really soapy and disgusting. But some people are not sensitive to that same compound, so they really enjoy cilantro. But I can't have anything with cilantro in it because it tastes disgusting, because I'm sensitive to that specific compound in there. So it's it can vary significantly among individuals based on genetics and their taste sensitivities. And then we already discussed how taste buds decrease in number with age, and olfaction decreases as well. So we have an overall decline of taste sensation because of both of those. So that is all the material for taste and smell. Definitely be familiar with the different pathways, the cranial nerves, the areas in the cortex that they go, like the taste to the different areas in the brainstem, and then the insular lobe. Let's be familiar with these different papillae, where the taste buds are, and then with olfaction, know again the pathways and where the information goes to, the cerebral cortex, the temporal lobes, hypothalamus, and hippocampus. Be familiar with these different the different cells, and then again, the pathway of how the stimulation, how these are stimulated. Okay, so that was taste and smell, and that ends our special senses module.